Bill, you wrote recently The Logical Thinking Process, okay? But that is the third book basically on the same subject.
Yes, it is.
Could you tell us the story from the first book to the latest one?
Certainly. The first book was Goldratt's Theory of Constraints, which I wrote in 1996. And I wrote that to describe how the thinking process was executed the way I learned it at the Goldratt Institute in 1993. It was a very difficult process to go through, meaning the building of the trees. And the book was helpful, but the book was also very difficult to wade through. Over the course of the next 10 years, as I taught the thinking process to various audiences in industry and other places, I came to realize that that there were easier ways to teach and to learn the thinking process than I had included in the book. So I started including first a bunch of examples of trees that I had created that weren't in the book. I also tried to capture some techniques that went beyond where the book was to help make it easier to build the trees. And I started putting these into binders of supplementary materials that I would hand out in the courses that I'd teach, in addition to the original book. By 2002 or 2003, the thickness of the supplementary materials was equal, if not greater, than the thickness of the original book. But I really didn't have much else that I could do about that. So time went on. I actually changed the approach that I did to the thinking process to include this gold tree concept. And around 2006, my editor at Quality Press contacted me and asked me if I wanted to write a second edition to Goldratt's Theory of Constraints. I said, I want to do more than that. I don't want to write a second edition. I want to rewrite the book because I want to incorporate this entire bunch of things that I had collected over 10 years. And there were different approaches that I wanted to take. Some chapters I wanted to rewrite entirely. And at least one major thing I wanted to leave out completely. So he said, okay, they were happy with that. And so that's exactly what I did. I rewrote the book from the ground up. Now, I say from the ground up, it doesn't mean it's all new. Some of what's in the book was in the earlier book, but I cherry-picked the parts that I thought needed to be there, and I eliminated a fair amount of stuff that didn't need to be there. I went with all new examples of logic trees that were more contemporary than the older ones. And so when I ended up publishing that book, I thought, well, I can see the same thing is going to happen over the years. I'm going to find new ways to do this better. I'm going to find new examples, and I'm going to start collecting another thick binder of supplementary materials. Funny thing happened, though. Apparently the second iteration of the thinking process, as I have described it here, has a little bit more sustaining capability than the first. And as a result, I have not actually changed any of the way I teach it. Haven't included more than 1 or 2 pages of supplementary tips and techniques. I did put in some more examples, but the sum total of the pages that go into this is about 20, maybe 25 pages altogether. So that is a newer book. Now, the interesting thing then is that I had also written a book called Breaking the Constraints to World-Class Performance. That originated at about the same time that Goldratt's Theory of Constraints did. It was the product of a different publisher that wanted a book that was targeted about the thinking process, but targeted more toward management, whereas Goldratt's Theory of Constraints is toward technicians who are interested in building trees. So I said, sure, I suppose I can do that as long as my other publisher doesn't object, and they didn't. They said, as far as we're concerned, it's a different book for a different audience, no problem. And so I ended up getting that published, and it sold reasonably well for a few years. But it suffered from the same problem that the original Goldrad's theory of constraints did. It needed to have some explanation associated with it, which I never bothered to provide because I had already done it for the first book. Along around 2002, 2001, 2002, I came to realize that the thinking process can be used for more than just solving complex system problems, which is what it was originally designed to do. You could actually use it to develop and deploy corporate strategy using the thinking process and a few other supplementary tools. And in point of fact, when I teach the course now, I give out copies of the logical thinking process to the participants, and I also give a copy of this book, Strategic Navigation, which is, call it the graduate manual. It's not intended to teach people how to do the thinking process, but it presumes that people who already know the thinking process might want to learn how to use it to deploy strategy, and so it explains how to do that. So that was the follow-on to Goldrad's theory of constraints, and it introduced the concept of the goal tree specifically for the strategy purposes. When it came time in 2006 to rewrite Goldrad's theory of constraints, I thought, what I really need to do when I rewrite this and incorporate all the changes that I want to make, I need to make it fit seamlessly with this book that I wrote in 2002. That book was supposed to follow the learning of the thinking process, but now I have a new book to teach the thinking process, so I have to make it backward compatible, so the two will still fit together. And actually, you can read the logical thinking process and then go to strategic navigation, and unless you looked at the print dates or the copyright dates, you wouldn't know the strategic navigation was written after before, 4 years before the logical thinking process.
And what were you looking for all this time between the beginning of and the latest work? It's, from what I understand, it's both the speed and the robustness of what you're building?
Right, and the whole idea is that when I learned the thinking process at the Goldratt Institute in 1993, it was a 10-day course, 10 hours a day, except for the last day of each week, which was usually about a half day. So 4 days of 10 hours each, 1 day of about 5-6 hours. And that is a tremendous amount of time, but it was necessary because the way it was taught was totally brute force. There was nothing you can read other than the checklists and examples of other trees. There was no kind of instructional material. So I wrote the original book in an effort to make this teachable, say in a college classroom, where your contact time is limited to maybe 3 or 4 hours a week, and you need to have something the students can take home and read and absorb, and then come into practice in the class. The problem was that book was written around the techniques that I had learned in 1993, which were really difficult. In other words, there were plenty of opportunities to perfect the thinking process that never took place at the Goldratt Institute. So consequently, when I rewrote this book, I was faced with the problem with my clients that nobody wanted to spend 10 days in a course. So I had to figure out, how can I do this in a shorter period of time? And I started preparing presentations that were organized almost like graduate lectures in college classrooms. And I found that I was able to, that combined with the books, I was able to compress a 10-day course down to about 6 days, and eventually down to 5.5. And that's where the length of my thinking process course is now. But it would not be possible without the books, and especially the second generation book, The Logical Thinking Process, because it's organized now for maximum efficiency in the use of the time. So even at that, it's tough to get people away from from their work for 6 days. And interestingly, I ran into another obstacle, and this was back when I was using the original Goldrat's Theory of Constraints book. I did a consulting with an electronics company in the Netherlands in 1998, and they had 20 people they wanted to put through the program. They wanted to do 10 in each of 2 consecutive weeks, and I said, "Man, that's going to be hard to do." They said, "Don't worry, we're used to working hard." I said, these are going to be long days. I don't recommend this. "Oh, don't worry, we're good at what we do." And yes, they were. These are computer programmers, very smart people, used to thinking very objectively and so forth. I said, "Don't make me do this." And they said, "We have to do this." I said, "Okay, you're not going to get anything worthwhile after the 3rd day." They didn't believe me. So we went through the entire thinking process course in 5 days, 5 very full days. And a couple of those days we went 12-hour days. And by the end of the 3rd day, what I predicted had come to pass. These super smart, hardworking people, their eyes were rolling back in their heads, and they didn't absorb much, if anything at all, for the last 2 days of the course. And I was wrung out. And I swore after that I would never let a client do that to me again. So I now break the course into 2 parts. 3 days one week, 3 days the next week. Most of the clients don't like the idea of spreading it out too far apart, but they also don't want it 8 or 10 days away from the office. So I typically will schedule it to start on a Wednesday, go through a Friday, have a weekend off to get the mental recharging done, and then do the last 2.5 days in the second week. And a lot of clients find that to be acceptable because they do get some work in the office in 2 consecutive weeks with the training crammed in between. So that's really how all of this business developed with the books. And as it stands now, I do not believe that there is a way to compress the thinking process effectively and have the learning work properly below 5.5 days without changing the entire model of the program. And I think that could be done, but we'd have to see how it could work out.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.